Pinterest revealed that the platform has now reached 578 million global monthly active users.
When I came into Pinterest, it had its own issues too. At the time I came in, Pinterest was cloning TikTok like everybody else and sort of doubling down on short form video. As a first move to try to prove that we could tune AI for positivity, we said, let's change the optimization function.
You think that all social media platforms have the ability to create more of this conscious versus unconscious choice?
It's an editorial choice. The maximum view time is I actually get the most provocative point of view on this side and the most provocative point of view on this side, and just let them shout at each other because that will maximize view time. That's an editorial choice.
What was the moment that you realized that Pinterest was at risk of becoming what you now actively fight against? I'm Sammy Cohen, and this is Social Currency, a podcast that unpacks the stories that are shaping business, culture, and the intersection of the two. What happens when the CEO of a social media giant tells Wall Street that they're wrong, and he still wins? My guest today, Bill Ready, has made a career out of going against the grain. Before becoming CEO of Pinterest in 2022, Bill cut his teeth as a mechanic in his father's Kentucky auto shop. He led Braintree through its $800 million acquisition by PayPal and held top leadership roles at Google and PayPal. Now at Pinterest, he's betting on a different kind of internet, one that prioritizes conscious choices over doom scrolling. He's made bold moves, like making all accounts under 16 private, and this is a decision that tanked the stock price by 26% overnight. And he publicly compared today's social media industry to big tobacco. And yet, under his leadership, Pinterest just crossed 578 million global monthly active users and grew revenue 17% year over year. In this conversation, we dig into the future of social platforms, from how Gen Z really wants to engage online, to Pinterest's role in shaping digital shopping, to creating healthy relationships with social media. This is Bill Ready's Social Currency. Bill Ready, welcome to Social Currency.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start this conversation off by talking about your very first job, which of course is very different from your current role as CEO of Pinterest. You started working in your father's auto repair shop in Kentucky when you were just a teenager. So first, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Definitely a universe away from Silicon Valley, for sure. My mom and dad had a little auto repair shop in a small town in Kentucky and worked there from the time I was a kid. Officially when I was 13, but I would say before I was 13, I sort of worked in the back of the shop, and then by the time I was 13, I worked in the front of the shop. And but it was formative. A lot of lessons that stuck with me from that, both in terms of what it means to take care of customers. It's literally if we took care of customers, then we ate well. If we if we didn't have customers or or something went wrong, I was like, oh yeah, then we go to the other grocery store on the other side of town where the meat was only expired by a few days and probably wouldn't make you sick. And so it was like a very direct connection to what it means to go take care of customers and do things that are good for them. And so those are formative experiences. There's that book, Everything I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I'd say everything I really need to know I learned in a little town in Kentucky, because a lot of those sort of values and lessons are things that have guided me as much or more than anything I learned in Silicon Valley or anywhere else.
So thinking back, can you share a specific early lesson that you learned from either watching your dad or working in the auto repair shop that has somehow shaped how you navigate business today?
Well, one example that I share is one of the things that I think has happened with tech companies generally is that you're building these products that are used by hundreds of millions or billions of people. And I think the customer sort of becomes nameless and faceless. And I think a lot of the folks that build these products may not have had the experience of having to go face a customer directly. And so there's one experience I went through when I was 13 and had just started working in the front of the shop. And I'll never forget it because, I had messed up on, it was a small town and everybody's sort of living paycheck to paycheck, right? I had messed up on a farmer's truck. So I tell my mom and dad, I did. And they're like, okay, well, you go explain it to him and tell him what you did. And what are you going to do to make it right? I'm like, what? I've got to go. And they're like, yeah, you go do it. And when I start telling that story, people sort of imagine a Norman Rockwell painting where the farmer pats me on the head and says, oh, it's okay. No, he needed that truck for his livelihood too. His family was depending on that. And so when I tell that story, I can feel the lump in my throat, my knees knocking, and what it felt like to have to go say oh, I messed up and I didn't get it right. But then what am I going to do to make it right? And so, we've got more than 500 million users on the platform. But I see them all looking back at me the same as I did that, farmer whose truck I was working on. I'm like, oh, that's sort of how I think about the decisions I make. I can't guarantee I get them all right, But I think about like, oh, if I had to face my customer eye to eye, could I explain to them why I genuinely think I did what was in their best interest? And I think that's just a very different way than I think a lot of the people that are building technology evaluate these things. But I think it stemmed from that experience of like having to go look a customer in the eye, and if you got it wrong, you got to explain yourself, and what are you going to do to make it right?
And that customer first mentality that you're describing has clearly stuck with you throughout your career. And I want to jump forward a few decades to 2023, when you had to make a decision that really tested those values. And the move that I'm alluding to is the very controversial one to make Pinterest accounts private for users under age 16. And when you did this, it caused the company's stock to drop 26%. Now, most CEOs would call that a crisis, but you called that an investment. So what did you see then that Wall Street missed?
So at that time, I was still pretty new coming into the company. So I've been CEO a little over 3 years. I was a little over 6 months into the company. And at that time, the narrative on Pinterest was that Pinterest was aging up and aging out and sort of missed the next generation. And that was true. Users were declining. The company was in, a difficult financial position. From day one coming in, I wanted positivity to be central to our reason for being. And I think Pinterest had always, and credit to the founders, I think they put a good soul in the company, and they had always wanted to avoid the most negative aspects of social media, but had not really made that central to the reason for being or a competitive differentiator. So that was on my mind from the beginning. And so we had started to do work on that. I wanted to prove that you could tune AI for positivity. Coming over from my prior seat at Google, where we were using AI in the labs and all these things, I wanted to prove that you could tune AI for positivity. And so that was there from the beginning. But about 6 months in, a little over 6 months in, there had been a series of stories about child predators on every social media platform, every platform except for Pinterest. And then they found there were some of these things where, there were people on Pinterest that were making lewd comments, pictures of kids and things like that. And unfortunately, none of it was, the images were otherwise innocuous, because there's protections to make sure you can't, post nude photos or things like that. But just the fact that they're making lewd comments, was disturbing, right? Especially on pictures of kids. So I looked at that, and, the thing that was very, very clear was that, and it's easy when you say it out loud, it's just not safe for kids under 16 to be contacted by strangers online. And somehow we've been conditioned that that's true across social media. That was potentially a crisis. We invested and said, no, we are going to lead from the front. We are going to double down on this as our reason for being. And we're going to do private by default for under 18, private only for under 16, which means you can't switch that, right? And back to our stock dropping, people thought it would kill us with Gen Z. People thought it would, that was like, okay, well, Pinterest is already struggling to be relevant for the next generation. So people thought okay, it's done. So Pinterest is, is not going to be able to win the next generation. But my view is first and foremost, is just the right thing to do. As a parent, looking at what had happened across all the social media platforms, and people sort of ride out the PR wave, but not really make material changes. And no, we're going to fix this. This is, we've got to make sure this is safe for young people on our platform. And the bet was there'd be a real demand for a more positive place. And that was my bet coming in. I was okay, if we believe that, here's a moment to do the right thing and double down on that bet that there's going to be real demand for a more positive space, for a safer space. And, yes, our stock dropped 26 or 20-some%, whatever it was, when we made that change. But fast forward a year, and Gen Z had become the largest, fastest growing demographic on our platform. And it was for exactly that reason that they were looking for safer spaces. And so if you ask Gen Z now why they come to Pinterest, two things they'll reliably say. The first is probably, well, Pinterest just gets me. And so that's using AI for great shopping recommendations and things like that. But the other is they'll say some form of, well, Pinterest is a safe space away from the toxicity I experience elsewhere. Or, well, when I'm on other platforms, it's other people telling me who to be. When I'm on Pinterest, I get to figure out who I want to be. So, so that shift of saying, no, we think there will be demand for a more positive, safer space. Not only did that play out, and we did it because it was the right thing, but we also said hey, we think there's a chance to differentiate here, and that has turned out to be true. And I think it's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope, not just for our platform, but just from what young people have had to experience with social media, that there's a chance to go change the industry. right? There's a chance to prove, if you can prove there's a demand for safer spaces, for more positive spaces, maybe over a long period of time, that can start to change the tenor of what's happening across social media more generally.
And you had mentioned your tenure when you had actually made that decision. You said around 6 months or so. Mm. That makes it an even tougher decision to make because of how new you were to Pinterest. So looking back, what advice would you tell other CEOs or business leaders who are looking to make some kind of principled stand, but are afraid to because of short-term market reaction?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, and it's not even just for public companies. I think just generally, short-term versus long-term. I think this is at the core of where a lot of business decisions go bad. You've got to have the courage of your conviction to make a bet. And I think there's a balance of you got to have the courage of your conviction to make a bet and do what you in your heart of heart thinks is right. But then you've also got to listen to customers along the way and be responsive to feedback and say, okay, is this working or not working? And so I think the latter, sort of just measuring what's happening with engagement metrics or things like that, it's so much easier to do. And it's sort of the sugar high, right? That okay, I can see tomorrow, what happened with engagement metrics after a change. But are you willing to see that through to, oftentimes the things that are the most differentiated take a little bit longer to play out. And one, do you have the courage of your conviction to see that through? But then secondly, I'd say, you have to look a little closer. One of the things I say all the time is I share this with other entrepreneurs. Users will give you clues. Even some of these things that seem long-term, they'll give you clues. A good example that I give is, earlier in my career with Venmo, where you did 5 startups, Venmo and Braintree being the 2 most recent. When we did the social feed in Venmo, that now at the time is very contrarian. People were like, what are you doing, mixing social with payments? And the genesis of that was that the original version of the app was sort of modeled after the memo field on a check, because just sort of paying somebody back for something. So at that time, these people would, the only other way to do it is write a check. And so it was modeled after the memo field. And we saw people were making little witty banter in that. And the 2 other co-founders, came and said, Bill, there's real conversation happening here. And I'll confess, I didn't love it at first. But, they showed me, and it's oh yeah, there was little witty banter happening. They're let's just see if we can promote this more. Give, the users are doing it already. What if we let them do it more? What'll happen? And that's how the social feed and Venmo came about. So the users give you clues. And so that was definitely one that was another example of longer term conviction, but also looking not just at the day-to-day engagement metrics or what are the metrics that move in a day, but looking for where the users may give you other clues or customers may give you other clues as to the things that they want.
So let's talk about some of your other strongly held beliefs. You wrote an op-ed in The Hill where you directly compared today's social media landscape to that of big tobacco. And that's a pretty serious indictment of your own industry. So what was the moment that you realized that Pinterest was at risk of becoming what you now actively fight against?
I think I was the first and still the only CEO of a social media company to say that the comparison to big tobacco is appropriate. I've said that because the research is overwhelmingly clear, right? That when you look at the rise in anxiety and depression and the youth mental health crisis, social media has clearly played a key role in that. But unlike big tobacco, I don't know of a good, healthy use for tobacco, right? There are good aspects of social media too, right? So I think the question was always how do you sort of separate good from bad on these things? But from the beginning, that was my view coming into Pinterest, was that what tipped me over to come to Pinterest was yes, I thought there's something really interesting to do around visual search, and what we could do for shopping. But it's really, can we prove that you could tune AI for positivity? If you step all the way back from it, I talked about, Venmo, I was enamored with social in the early days of social, just like everybody else. We had multiple of the Facebook co-founders as seed investors in Venmo. And so we took a lot of notes from, other social experiences. And, I was enamored with social in those early days because just like everybody else, I saw it helping us reconnect with long lost friends, helping us know our neighbors better, helping democracies rise up, until one day it wasn't. And what changed in that? What changed was that AI got put in charge of what you see on social media, more than a decade ago. It was just sort of earlier forms of AI before it was a household name. And the AI figured out that you look longer at the things that trigger you, whatever your triggers are, whether it's that politician that gets you really fired up or someone else's fake perfect life that you can't possibly live up to, whatever your triggers are, it'll figure it out because you look longer at those things. And, so when the AI was put in charge of what you see, it was told, maximize your view time, maximize how long you look. And it figured out you look longer at the things that trigger you. And people say, well, oh, no, but I see good stuff too. And it's like, oh yeah, well, the maximum dopamine release is to keep you on the roller coaster, like show you some good stuff, then show you some bad stuff, show you some good stuff, show you some bad stuff. So it's keep you up and down and keep you on the roller coaster. That's the longest engagement. And so back to your question of like, what did I see in Pinterest? Like, okay, that was what I wanted to prove coming in, was that we could tune AI for positivity, that we could prove a more positive business model for social media. But Pinterest, it had its own issues too. At the time I came in, Pinterest was cloning TikTok like everybody else and sort of doubling down on short form video, and amongst many other things. And is part of why Pinterest had sort of lost its way at the time. I saw that when I came into Pinterest, the primary optimization function inside of Pinterest when I joined was to maximize view time. And guess what was happening? The same triggering content was rising to the top. And so as a first move to try to prove that we could tune AI for positivity, we said, well, let's change the optimization function. It can't be to maximize view time. What if we optimize for time well spent instead of just time spent? What if we optimize, instead of view time, optimize for like actually helping people do something in their real life? And so when we switch that optimization to things that people actually took an action on, things that people intentionally wanted to see, all of a sudden totally different content rose to the top. And instead of being triggering content, it was self-help videos and DIY, or things that help you figure out your fashion or your taste, your style. And the way I talk about this, sort of an analogy I'll use to try to help people understand like how these algorithms work, is that in my view, what has happened in social media is that sort of with AI trying to maximize your view time and triggering content doing that, we've all had the experience of sitting in a traffic jam, especially here in LA, right? We all know when we get to the front of the traffic jam, we shouldn't look at the car crash. But what do we all do? Well, I sat here for 45 minutes. I want to know what the heck happened. So you get to the front of the traffic jam, and you sneak a peek at the car crash. In these algorithmically driven feeds, oh, well, Sammy, you looked at the car crash. I'm going to show you another car crash. Yeah. Oh, you looked at that one too. I'll show you another one, until eventually it's all car crashes. But if you ask somebody after they saw the car crash, hey, Sammy, do you want to see another car crash? The vast majority of people say, no, that was terrible. I don't want to see another one of those. And the difference in that is conscious choice versus unconscious choice. And so in a lot of these feeds, like the only choice you get to make is how long you looked. And so as soon as we switched and started to give people agency, my belief was like, you know what? I think people know more what's good for them. It's just nobody's asking them after the car crash if they want to see another one or not. What if we gave people more agency? What if we actually gave people more than just how long they looked to express what they want to see? And when we did that, when we started tuning the AI, not for what people looked at, but for what people said they wanted to see again, totally changed the content that was rising to the top, because people actually knew more what was good for them. And there's exceptions to that. You can go down a rabbit hole or things like that. So it's not 100%, but by and large, if people had the choice, they knew what was good for them. And so, that was, one of the first examples of, one, us proving that we could tune AI for positivity, but secondly, proving out that we're going to take a different philosophical approach, because it wasn't just about teaching the AI to be more positive. It was also about giving users more agency for them to tell us what they thought was good for them.
Yeah. What would you say to a critic who would argue that it's impossible for these social media platforms that are leaning much more heavily into the video first content to avoid the same addictive patterns? Are you saying essentially that you think that all social media platforms have the ability to create more of this conscious versus unconscious choice?
Absolutely, yes. And, this is, what I talked about potentially, we hope, inspiring change across the industry, back to like time well spent versus just time spent. We actually publish our findings. we share them. We're not trying to keep it a secret, actually sharing like, hey, here's what, I'm talking about it here. I hope others will copy it, because at the core of why this matters to me is, my daughter's 11 years old. I love building things. Why am I choosing to build this thing? Like, I hope I can make a little dent in the world she gets to grow up in the world that all our young people get to grow up in. And it is the definition of a collective action problem, right? When you look at the youth mental health crisis, it can't just be that like one platform changes. You need an industry to change. So we're sharing these things, and like, yes, other platforms, could do the same. And to be clear, we've chosen to be less of an entertainment-based platform and a platform that is more about intent. And so, it may happen in a different way on an entertainment-based platform. I think one of the things that isn't being discussed enough, and I'll give you another one that no other tech CEO has been willing to say. For all of us that are running these tech platforms, we are making a form of editorial choice in the way we tune our algorithms. And nobody wants to say it because they're worried about the liability of that. And to be very clear, it's not the same kind of editorial choice as, the New York Times could make, where like a human editor can read every piece of content. We and other platforms get billions of pieces of content every single day. It'd be impossible to have human review on every single one of those. But we do make choices in the way we tune our algorithms. I just shared an example of that, right? And so do we tune these algorithms, for content that you actually say you want to see versus just what you looked at? That's a choice we can make. Do you tune for the most well-reasoned debate? Or do you tune for what's going to make people shout at each other the most? What's going to be, the most salacious? Or what's going to be, the most provocative stance on either side of the debate? Well, we've seen that play out. Is that making us better? It's an editorial choice to decide whether you want to present balanced points of view that say, oh, you know what? Here's a point of view on this side. Here's a point of view on this side. Here's the things that actually each side has a legitimate point of view, and how you might, start to come together and sort of have a meeting of the minds. Or do you say, well, actually, the maximum engagement, the maximum view time is I actually get the most provocative point of view on this side and the most provocative point of view on this side, and just let them shout at each other, because that will maximize view time. That's an editorial choice. We've been very clear about the editorial choices that we're making. When you come to our platform, we're going to tune for things that, help you feel better, help you have a real impact in your real life. To be very clear, we're not perfect. Again, it's not the same kind of editorial choice as, what a newspaper could make or something like that, but it's a form of editorial choice. And we're being clear about what editorial choice we're making. And my hope would be that as consumers get more choice and understand which platforms are thinking about these things in different ways, they can make a choice for where they want to go. I think that's one of the things that people don't realize, is that there's been this amazing democratization of content creation. This is a great example of it right here. And I think it's wonderful. The entrepreneurs that have been, sort of born through that. And, I think it's fantastic. But while content creation has democratized, the distribution of that content is more concentrated than ever, right? I remember when I was a little kid, we had 3 or 4 TV channels. Cable existed, but in our little town in Kentucky, we didn't have it yet. I remember how mind expanding was when we got 30 channels, and then it was 50, then 100, then 200. Then I was like, okay, well, it's too many. But now you have just a few platforms distributing the vast majority of the content that you see. And what choice do you get in what you see? You can't just change the channel the way that you did before. And the algorithm is going to decide what you see. So my hope is that we can prove that, one, let's be clear about our editorial choices, prove that there's consumer demand for more positive spaces, safer spaces. My hope is that'll spur competition and that other people want to go compete for that demand as well.
Clearly, social media can be the most challenging for young people, as we've been talking about. And Pinterest has taken a public stance to limit phone usage during school hours. And you're personally working with state legislation to try and make that happen. And from a business perspective, this sounds quite counterintuitive, because you're voluntarily reducing screen time from your fastest growing demographic. So how do you explain this strategy? You
asked me before about short-term versus long-term. I think it's another example of short-term versus long-term. If you step all the way back from it and say, is it in the interest of your business to have healthy customers? In the long term, the clear answer should be yes, right? And so we're taking a long-term view that if we invest in the well-being of our customers, the well-being of our users, that will pay long-term dividends for us. And especially the more they know that that's what we're doing. So it's not just that we've advocated for phone-free schools or distraction-free schools, things like that. There's a lot of room for local administrators, local, schools and parents to decide how they want to limit phone use in schools. But it's really about limiting distraction. If you're of school age and you open our app during school hours, we'll give you a prompt that says, we love you, we care about you, but we also we care about your education. And so come back and see us after school. And people do use Pinterest for education purposes. So if they need to sort of go past that, they can. But it's us letting our users know we actually care about their well-being. And again, I think we're demonstrating 8 straight quarters of record high users. Gen Z is now more than half the platform, our largest, fastest growing demographic. I think we're proving there's real demand for that users actually, I think Gen Z, even more so than millennials, they're much more aware of what's happening to them on social media. And again, they just hadn't had an alternative. They were proving out there's demand for an alternative. And my hope is that that'll help them start to demand even more positive alternatives.
And I want to get into the business of Pinterest. So one of the fundamental changes that you've made to the Pinterest business has been converting the user experience from what you call this digital window shopping event, where people couldn't as easily shop for products, to a platform where people can easily be directed to shop within one click. So how do you see Pinterest continuing to evolve the consumer shopping experience?
This was one of the biggest user complaints on Pinterest when I joined, was that Pinterest, you'd find all kinds of images of things that you might want to buy. More than half the users said they were on Pinterest to shop, but you couldn't click on nearly anything. And so it was one of the biggest user complaints when I joined. And so given my past life, building commerce platforms and things like, okay, well, know how to solve that. Let's make it so that when you see something, even if you saw something in a lifestyle image, like you're looking at a picture of, Beyonce or Taylor Swift or, Chappell Roan on our platform, whoever, pick your favorite. Well, you're not listening to their music on our platform most of the time. It's you're interested in their style and their taste. And so, if you want to go buy Chappell Roan's shoes or whatever she was wearing, okay, let's give you a way to go do that. But so we made it so people can shop the images they see. And that's been a huge part of the, increase, sort of the resurgence of our platform. That's been a big part of it. But the other bigger thing that I saw as an opportunity is that, I've built a lot of, commerce infrastructure, things like that with Braintree. By the time I left from PayPal, Braintree is powering the buying experiences for more than half the apps on your phone, especially the most popular apps, Uber Rides and Airbnb and all these kinds of things. So I built a lot of, commerce infrastructure. But one of the things that, I was thinking about is that, the first 25 years of e-commerce sort of solved buying, but killed shopping. And the distinction being that, the first 25 years of e-commerce was really I know what I want, get it to me the cheapest and the fastest. And by the way, some amazing businesses were built out of that, and a lot of great utility for users and products that we all love. And so there's a lot of goodness in that. But there's a whole huge part of shopping that is joyful. It's a pastime. People want to walk the bazaar. They want to be inspired. They want to discover. There's the thrill of the find, right? And that hasn't really been solved in the digital world. And so with Pinterest, yes, we wanted to solve a user pain point of users were screaming and saying I find all the stuff I want to buy on Pinterest, just give me a darn link so I can go buy it. Okay, well, so we went and solved that, and that really drove a lot of increased engagement for our users and for our customers. This is one of the things I saw as an opportunity coming into Pinterest, that what people are already doing on Pinterest, of sort of figuring out their style and their taste and sort of figuring out how they'd pair an outfit or things like that. That's the more joyful part of shopping. And so we've really leaned into that. So talk about tuning AI for positivity. We're also, tuning AI to be a really great personal shopping assistant for you on Pinterest. And we don't talk about it as a shopping assistant, because I think that's not really how our users think about it. But, when you hear users say things like, well, Pinterest just gets me. Well, it's because they come to Pinterest to figure out their style and taste, to sort of curate and think about how would I put that outfit together? I really like that handbag, or I like that pair of shoes, but how would I put an outfit together around that? Well, people are figuring those things out on Pinterest, and that gives us really unique signal to then tune, not only to make better recommendations to that user, But then, we have hundreds of millions of users every day that's what they're doing on our platform, is not just figuring out their own taste, but making product associations and, saying, oh, well, that's a great handbag. How would you style that handbag? That's a great pair of shoes. How would you put an outfit together around that pair of shoes? That lets us personalize better for that user. But then the next user that comes and says, I like that handbag too. But boy, I don't know if I'm bold enough to go do that. I don't know if I could go do that. Or how would I make that work for me? And then we can say, oh, well, we know how lots of people style that handbag. And we also know the intersection between people that style that handbag and the ones that have a taste similar to yours. And so then we can make a recommendation, and people then, they still have the agency. They're still in control of, like, it's what they want, but it's them getting to figure out their style and taste, but with really amazing recommendations from the AI. And, what I say that we're trying to solve for is, again, that joyful part of shopping. But a lot of the joy of shopping, you'd have done that with someone. So think of, who you enjoy shopping with the most in your life, whether it's a best friend or a sister or your mom or, whoever. Okay. Or a great salesperson at a boutique that you really love or whatever. Well, how do we make it so that, when you're on Pinterest, you're getting recommendations that feel just as good as the best friend that would have said, oh yeah, that's going to look amazing on you. And you know what? What about this thing with it too? Like, that would actually complete the whole look. And you say, yeah, you're right. And so that's what we're really trying to build for. And we're not all the way there, but I think we've made a lot of progress in that direction.
And everything that you're talking about, and you mentioned this earlier, the idea of Pinterest just gets me, right? It's having the feeling that consumers get when they're on the platform of, wow, what I'm looking for, somehow this algorithm, this platform just understands what I'm looking for. And the approach is clearly working. In the latest Q2 earnings, Pinterest revealed that the platform has now reached 578 million global monthly active users with a 17% year-over-year revenue growth. So we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to take a new angle here. So in a social media landscape that is very much dominated by this video first content, Pinterest is still remaining Pinterest despite all of that. So outside of the items that we just covered, what are some of the key reasons for Pinterest's continued growth despite not leaning into this video first content?
We have a lot of video on the platform, but we made a very intentional choice. I mentioned when I first came in, Pinterest was cloning TikTok like everybody else. And I said to the team, I was like, we're competing for whether we're going to be like the fourth or fifth best TikTok. And I don't know if the world needs a fourth or fifth best TikTok. I think the world does need an amazing Pinterest. And so what does that mean? I saw Pinterest as a place that was really about, most of the social media platforms out there are around entertainment. It's a lean back experience. You're sort of just passively consuming content. Pinterest naturally had lean forward intent. You were there to do something, right? Whether you're figuring out how to redesign a room or how to put an outfit together or how to make a craft, or, it was a lean forward experience with intent. And so I said, first of all, what would it mean to be an amazing Pinterest? It shouldn't be about passive content consumption. Pinterest is where people go to figure themselves out. That's active. That's a lean forward experience. What we have done, back to your question with short form video, we have short form video on the platform, but it's not entertainment based. We're not trying to maximize your view time. If we were, we go more in the entertainment direction. But we bring video on the platform and it helps you satisfy an intent, whatever that intent is. So if there's a great video that's going to show you how, it's talking about styling the handbag. If there's a great video that's going to show you how to style that handbag, we'll show you that video. My daughter's gotten into knitting. And so I'm learning to knit with her. She's far better than I am. But my rule is whatever she's into, I'm into. So that's the deal. So I'm doing my best to figure out knitting. And so, we can go find videos of, here's the easy, video that'll show me in sort of 90 seconds, how to go do the thing that I'm trying to make. But the video is aligned around intent. And it's aligned around what people consciously say they want to see again, instead of just what you looked at. Because again, if it's just, you looked at it, it'll be a lot more of the gotcha content or the triggering content, back to the car crash analogy.
And in preparation for this interview, I read a stat that to me was very eye-opening. So Pinterest has developed a bunch of these inclusive AI tools. Think body type and skin tone ranges, hair patterns, and more. So users that are searching with these inclusive AI tools save on average 75% more pins than users who search without using these tools, which is pretty crazy. So this obviously suggests that there was some kind of unmet demand. So why did it take the tech industry so long to build these types of features?
Again, I think it's a little bit courage of conviction to say, what do we think is a right thing, and being willing to commit to it and see it through to prove that you can do it. And on, talk about tuning AI for positivity, we started with that and we said, okay, well, if we want to tune for positivity, we also need to tune for inclusivity. We're a platform of more than 500 million users. They're all around the world from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life. Oh, well, users are going to want to see themselves represented on the platform. And back to just sort of putting yourself in the mind of the user, like, well, whatever they're trying to do, whether it's put together an outfit or design a room or things like that, they're gonna want, well, hey, I want to understand what people with a similar taste to me, think about these things, and we help with that. But then it's also, if I'm trying to style something, well, how's that going to look on someone like me, right? Whatever that is for you, that you're going to want to see. That's what you're trying to figure out. So, it's like, okay, well, let's give people the tools to do that. And so people, could see, example for me, like, hey, you can show me lots of great, slim cut Italian suits, but like, oh, that's not who I am, right? Like I need, I might need something with a little more room in it than that. And so like, okay, let me go make that choice. So then I can get the one like, okay, like that's the look, but like, it'll work for me. Almost everyone has that of like, oh, I need this, whatever body type, right? And we actually see, that extended sizing is at either end of the spectrum is one of the most popular features. Again, because people come in all different shapes and sizes, all different backgrounds. And so with 500 million plus people on the platform, we want to reflect what real people are, which is all manner of variation. And another one I'll give you that, not only do we see that those, when people engage with those inclusive features where they can choose, skin tone ranges or hair pattern types or body type ranges, that they save 75% more, so it's a great example of doing well by doing good. It's actually good for usage, but just because we listen to our users and what they want. But then another one I'll give you, just give you a little bit of hope for humanity. When we do diversity by default in our feeds, to say, oh, well, when people come to the platform, they want to see not just what the average fashion model looks like, they want to see what all different kinds of people look like. What does the real population look like? And that's all different kinds of people. That diversity by default is actually the best engagement, which again, that's not just about our platform. I said, it's hope for humanity. They're like, oh, you know what? Yeah, people want to see more people like themselves to figure out, oh, how's that going to look on me or whatever. But it's also, they want to see the real population reflected and all the beauty of all the different people from all the different backgrounds. Well, that's the real world. And that's what people want to see reflected. That's actually the highest engagement. So it's quite encouraging.
It makes sense. It makes sense that people respond better. Of course, spending more time on the platform, but engaging with it more too, when people feel as if they themselves are represented. And it seems like common sense, yet so much of tech hasn't really caught up to that yet. I'm
an engineer by background, so I'm going to pick on engineers a little bit. But I think, I talked about like so I'm picking on my own here. But I think especially for shopping and things like that, I talked about like the first 25 years of e-commerce solved for buying but killed shopping. If you parse that a little bit more, it was solving more for like the utilitarian parts of it, right? And, you could find on other shopping sites like, 85 different ways to filter on different things, every specification of an electronic device or these kinds of things. But it was solving for the utilitarian and less for the things that were more qualitative, right? And so, how do you create a metric around joy, right? Oh, that's harder, right? It's not as easy to measure, but not all that matters is measured, right? Mm-hmm. And so now there are ways to get at that, right? It's just harder and you got to be committed to it. But I think some of you, to your question of like, why is it taking so long? I think a lot of it, you've got engineers building these things. I think a bias that is very easy to get trapped in, and I think almost every person building a product has to work really hard to get away from this, is like people end up building for themselves. Mm-hmm. What do I want? And, if you're an engineer, you probably skew a little bit more towards being utilitarian, sort of less focused on the qualitative aspects of this and things like that. No, like I want to make sure I spend the least amount of time in the store as possible. I know what I want. I want to get in, get it, and get out. It's like, well, okay, for a utilitarian journey, if I need to pick up like, milk and eggs on the way home from work, maybe that's true. But again, if you step back, depending on which third-party data you look at, only about 25% or so of commerce is digitized. Well, what's the other 75%? The other 75% isn't just utilitarian. It's, well, why am I redesigning that room? It's actually because I'm going to bring people together in that room. How do I want people to feel when they walk into that room? Yeah, I'm looking for clothing. Sometimes it's utilitarian. They're like, no, like I just need I'm going to the beach. I need a new pair of flip-flops or something, right? Sometimes utilitarian. But most of the time it's like, how do I want to feel when I wear it? What's that outfit that's going to make me, walk a little taller, feel a little more confident in that next job interview or whatever it is? And so that's about way more than just the utilitarian things that you can measure. And so I think that's been missed because there's probably a bias by the folks that we're building. But I think also just harder to measure some of those things, but not all that matters is measured, right? And so I think it's like, we've got to commit ourselves to trying to measure these things. We talked about youth mental health. It's one of the things that we've done there is to say, okay, harder to measure the impact on mental health, but it matters a lot. And so we're actually doing that, right? We've partnered with third parties, with experts, universities, to say, oh, what's the very best we could do to measure the impact on, well-being after time spent on the platform? And at its simplest, do people feel better or worse after they spend time on your platform? Oh, it turns out you can measure that. It's not the sugar high of like, in every session whether you succeeded. But if you look at a study across a large enough number of people, can you see, how does one platform compare to another platform in terms of like how you feel after time spent? You can measure how people feel. You can measure, did you actually solve for that joyful part of shopping? But I think that's some of the bias that gets baked in by the folks that are building, not because they're bad people, but just because we all come with our inherent biases around these things.
And I want to talk about one of my favorite aspects of Pinterest. So Pinterest has a very well-known report that comes out annually, and it's called Pinterest Predicts.
Yes.
And this is a report that foreshadows the following year's trends based on internal user searches. So how does Pinterest think about its role in actually shaping the cultural zeitgeist and showcasing consumer trends?
So, this is a thing that I think was always there on Pinterest, but I talked about how, the positivity had been there, but it wasn't, sort of brought to the foreground and made like a competitive differentiator. I think similarly with this, like tastemaking has been at the core of Pinterest for a very long time. I imagine there's got to be a lot of the influencers and creators are publishing elsewhere because Pinterest is at its core is a creative platform. It's like, they've got to be on our platform, even though Pinterest wasn't really known for that. And as I dug into it, it's like, oh my gosh, like so many of the most popular creators that you would see on other platforms, and if you go talk to them, and they'll say they work out all their stuff on Pinterest first before they go publish elsewhere. And I did a thing at Cannes with Emma Chamberlain, who's amazing. Mm-hmm. And she talked about this at an interview that she and I did together, where she talked about how she figured out all her stuff on Pinterest. And, she's going to post on all the platforms where her audience is, but she figures it out on Pinterest first. And so back to your question on Pinterest Predicts, we see that, not only do we have so many of those creators, the folks who are sort of, shaping culture and zeitgeist on our platform, sort of figuring things out before they post it elsewhere, so we get to see it first. It's also the case that just by the very nature of what happens on our platform, people are planning ahead. There's other platforms that can do like the year in review because they knew all the stuff that you clicked on, or that you bought. And so it'd be like the year in review. We can do the year ahead because we see people curating days, weeks, months before they make the purchase. And, you think about it, most commercial journeys are going to be multi-day, multi-week, multi-month, right? I gave that example of like, hey, you're looking for the outfit, to wear to the job interview, or you're going on vacation and like, okay, I want a few new outfits for the vacation, or I'm planning the vacation. Oh, I'm going to redesign a room. These things you're planning weeks and months ahead of time. And so what that lets us do across hundreds of millions of users is see what are they planning to do days, weeks, and months before they do it. And that's really great for other users on the platform. So other users can tap into that. But then it's also great for our customers because what do the customers want? What do great brands want to know? Well, they want to know where the zeitgeist is moving to, right? What's the next thing going to be? So we opened that up and made it available to, it's inherently there for our users because it's in the algorithm for what they see and get access to. But then we open it up to our customers to say, oh, well, we'll show you where the zeitgeist is going. And those Pinterest Predict trends are over 80% accurate. We've had multiple major partnerships where we have major brands, major advertisers that are using those insights to figure out where their customer is going to be before they'd see it elsewhere.
And you mentioned Emma Chamberlain, and something really fun that Pinterest did somewhat recently was Pinterest came out with a trend-inspired coffee blend with Emma Chamberlain's Chamberlain Coffee. And this is the first co-branded product that Pinterest has ever come out with. So can we expect to see more of these Pinterest Predicts-inspired products in the future?
We're super excited about that collaboration. Emma's amazing. She's so inspirational. And just, I think, puts a lot of positivity out there for, we talk about tuning for positivity. She's a great example of someone who's putting positivity out in the world, and credit to her, she was using our product as intended to sort of see what was out there. And so she was inspired by fisherman aesthetic was one of the things that was a trend. She's created an amazing coffee brand. That's where I go with my daughter to go get Chamberlain coffee. But she created a salted caramel latte from that, inspired by the fisherman aesthetic that was on the platform. But credit to her for creating that. But we do want to do more of these kinds of things of like leaning in. We're not a creator of physical products, but we do want to do more of these things where we can help bring inspiration, insight to others that are creating. We've had multiple examples of that. Our last year, Walmart had a whole creator effort, and they went to creators with what they saw as trends that they wanted their creators to engage with, or that their creators were helping to talk about with their products. Well, those came completely from our Pinterest Predicts, right? And so our mission is that we want to help people get the inspiration to create a life they love. Well, part of that is like, well, for other creators, for other people that are building things, for people who are trying to build a great brand or put great products out in the world. Well, we want to give them inspiration too, because their products provide inspiration for others, right? When I go get that, salted caramel latte at Chamberlain Coffee, well, it's not just that it's a really great cup of coffee. I'm going there with my daughter. And, it's a shared experience. And like, that's something really great. She's not drinking coffee, but they've got nice lemonade too. And so she can get a lemonade and we get a nice, father-daughter experience. And so, but like every great brand, every great product, I think they all want to create positive feelings, for their customers in different ways. And so how do we help them tap into where those customers are going, so they can create more of those positive experiences? Like, that's something we definitely want to do more of. You've asked me lots of questions about Pinterest. I've shared things that we're doing, but I understand you're a power user as well.
Yes.
I'd love to hear what you do on Pinterest, as well as feedback for me, feedback for us. What else would you love to see us do?
So first, in terms of my usage of Pinterest, of course, I use Pinterest like many of the users for inspiration, and I'll go for specific design requests, right? I'm looking for a way to redecorate my living room. I'll go to Pinterest first. But the thing that I use Pinterest for on a daily basis, at least Monday through Friday, on the days that I'm usually working, is I will go to Pinterest for thumbnail images that are shown on my main social feed. So nowadays with social media, especially for video first content, there will be a cover image that people can see when they're on your profile before they actually go to the video, if they're just looking on the profile page. And so like anything social media, you want your profile to be beautiful and aesthetic, because that's just the world that we live in. So I will go to Pinterest and I will get the background of the cover image. And then I use Adobe Express to then, mock it up and put some text on it. But that is something for me where Pinterest is the best source for those beautiful images that I use. So if you go to my profile today across any of the social channels that I'm on, you will see my profile and it's all images taken from Pinterest.
Oh, well, I absolutely love that. And so I gave that example of like, we see a lot of great creators and people who are shaping zeitgeist are on our platform before they publish elsewhere. Like, oh my gosh, like what an amazing example. Sammy's on Pinterest, getting ready for the show. And like, that's fantastic. I absolutely love hearing that.
Yeah. And in terms of feedback, I think for me, as someone who I consider myself a power user, I think I actually, and it goes back to so much of what we've been talking about, I actually use Pinterest not for video. I get my video, I get a lot of video elsewhere, but for me, because I'm going for specific use cases that are more static imagery, this isn't necessarily feedback, but it's just, I love what Pinterest is doing there. And when it comes to the search terms, I will have search terms that are very specific. I will say vibey, outdoor, scenery with green and yellow, and I will get the perfect image, which is like,
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm putting random words in the search bar, but it always works. So I think Pinterest is doing a great job with that.
Well, thank you for that. That's, we've talked about what we're doing with AI and things like that, but it's letting us take these like longer queries, know those, but then also start with a vibe and get you from a vibe to the thing that you want to do. So that's great feedback to hear. And, I'd also say just, the general usage pattern you were talking about there, maybe not wanting as much video. I talked before about, aligning video with intent. So it's like, that's one of the things we try to figure out is like, when is the video helping you do the thing you're trying to do? We're a platform where people are leaning forward, they have intent, like the example you were sharing. Well, if the video doesn't help you do something, then we want to show you, but less when we don't. But there's another factor that I think, and maybe sort of in your comment there a little bit, that we try to think about is like, I think people also see Pinterest as a more peaceful space, a quieter space. And what some users will say, because I spend a lot of time talking to users, I can't talk to all, nearly 600 million of them. But I spend a lot of time listening to users, talking to users, and I think what a lot of them will say is like, oh, sometimes it just feels like video shouts at me, right? Versus like, if I can just work with the images, then like it lets my mind be calm, lets me focus. And sometimes the video is just shouting at me. Like, and I've heard multiple users sort of describe it, in ways similar to that. This is one of the things we think about too, is like, one, is the video helpful? Is it helping you get something done? But then also, how do we as a platform not shout? How do we make it so that this can be a peaceful, creative space for you to figure yourself out for yourself, be who you want to be, not who others tell you to be. But then also, a place for you to, whatever it is that is inspiration for you, make, do, buy, create, whatever it is that you're into. But thank you for sharing. That's really, I absolutely love hearing from users, from customers, and that's what inspires us to go keep building. So thank you for sharing.
Great. So I want to move into the next section, and these are questions that I ask every guest. The first one is about systems. Mm-hmm. So can you share a system that you have, it can be daily or weekly, that you have in place that benefits either your career or business?
I've had the good fortune, for a kid from a tiny little town in Kentucky, of getting to build multiple products with billions of users and multiple startups from zero to billions in revenue. But across all those, one of the things that has been true universally, whether it's the startup or the big company, fast feedback loops win. And so, how do you build fast feedback loops into your business? How do you build fast feedback loops into the way that you're operating as a leader? And so I start and end my week every week meeting with my team. And then through the week, we've got cadences, for different products, different initiatives. Some that are on like a weekly review cadence, some that are on a monthly review cadence. But then of course, outside of those standard reviews, like, I meet with the team at the start of the week, the end of the week, and teams know like, hey, when you hit things along the way, fast feedback loops win. So we talk about that as a company. So that's the way that, an example of how I try to wire in those fast feedback loops. But I think that's really critical, whether you're a startup with 5 people, or whether you've got 50,000 people. Fast feedback loops win. They're harder to do at scale, which is why startups tend to, be more creative and build more new things, because it's harder to keep those fast feedback loops going when the bigger you get. But I think at the core, if you can do those well, it's a path to success.
The next question comes from our social currency corner, where I get your input on a trend or story that's impacting business and culture. So we used to think of social currency in terms of things like follower counts or social clout. Mm-hmm. But now things like experiences, insider knowledge, and even digital exclusivity in online communities are emerging as the new status symbol. So how do you see this new definition of status shaping how companies build loyalty?
So I agree with everything you just said in terms of like where that's been shifting. I think the experiences over things has been happening for a while, but people still buy a lot of things too, right?
Yeah.
One of the most important questions for anyone to answer is like, well, who am I? What do I stand for? What do I want to put out in the world? I think that now more than ever, people are having a hard time finding meaning, right? The places you used to get it. There's been, a fall of trust in institutions and like all these kinds of things. Like, where do you find purpose and meaning now? I think people are really seeking that. And so I think at the core of some of what you're talking about is like, if I distilled it all the way down, I think there's a real shift towards seeking authenticity, right? People are seeking meaning and purpose for themselves, and they're also seeking authenticity in what they engage with. And, I think you see with users all the time that I think more and more are sort of wise to the game as to oh, well, is this person telling about this product because they actually like this product? Or is somebody paying them behind the scenes to go say this is a great product? And people sniff that out. And I think there's a lot of that happens. And so people are really seeking authenticity around those things. And even in what people are purchasing, I think they're looking for authenticity in that as well. Is this, okay, well, the people that are building this product, what do they believe? What are they putting into this product? And, do they care what it does for the person at the other side? And you can tell, did somebody care about their craft or not care about their craft? And so I think the through line on all of that is this real push for authenticity and real craving for authenticity, because I think it's actually in a lot of ways become harder to find. Mm-hmm. And so therefore people are valuing it more and more. But that also means you can stand out more and more if you provide authentic experiences, whether it's content that you're creating or products that you're creating. You can stand out even more if you're truly authentic in what you're doing.
All right, let's end with a listener question. This one comes from Priya, who is a growth stage founder. You've been part of companies at every stage, from startup to acquisition to IPO and beyond. For founders who are scaling their companies rapidly, what's the most important operational discipline that you wish you'd implemented earlier on in your career?
Okay, this is a great one. I'd say maybe the single most important thing as an entrepreneur, when you start at the very beginning, you're chief cook and bottle washer. You're doing all the jobs. And if you're doing it well, from that day forward, every day, you're giving away some piece of your job. And ideally giving away to somebody who'll do that piece of your job better than you. But that's not just true as an entrepreneur. I think it's the most pronounced as an entrepreneur, right? Literally you start out as a person, and then over time it's oh, I need somebody to do my marketing for me. I need somebody to do, and if you're doing well, oh, now I need somebody to do my finances and my accounting for me, and or more people to build my products for me, and okay, now somebody should lead product for me. And so it's most pronounced in those early days of a startup. One of my favorite Bob Dylan quotes is, anybody not busy being born is busy dying, right? And so if you're busy being born, if you're busy building something and creating something, even if you're 50,000 people, well, you're going somewhere, which means, you should still be thinking about what part of my job should I be giving away to somebody else? For two purposes. One, you can be thinking about, well, what's the next thing that you have to do? But also, if you want to build something great, you need a lot of great people around you. The way that you get great people around you is you're giving away parts of the job, big underscore, to people that could do that part of the job better than you can. That's what's going to help you scale. It's what's going to help you succeed. And so it's an easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to do. And I think this is where, I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs will struggle with scaling, is because it can be really hard to give away some of those parts of the job. And it's not easy to do it. And you don't always find the right person, the first time around or whatever. But it's probably the absolute most important thing you do as an entrepreneur is, you start as chief cook and bottle washer, but you better be giving away, your job every single day going forward.
Amazing. Bill, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Sammy, for having me.
And my request for the listeners is that if you haven't checked out any of the Pinterest trend reports that Bill and I talked about, you are respectfully living under a rock. In July, they came out with their first ever men's trend report, and they revealed that male users now represent more than 1/3 of the global audience, which is awesome. And I was honestly surprised by that. So everyone should really check out their trend reports because it keeps you ahead of the curve and you just know what's coming next. So thanks again, Bill.
Thank you, Sammy.
This is incredible.
Yeah, well, great to be here and love what you're doing as well. And, as we were chatting about before, love that you're making information like this accessible in a different way to a broader audience. It's really amazing, and love your entrepreneurial story as well.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Social Currency. I've been wanting to launch this show for so long. I can't tell you how excited I am to do this and how thrilled I am that you're actually here listening. It means the world to me. If you liked what you heard today, please rate and review the podcast because it massively helps to support the work I do to bring the show to life. And if you want to keep up with the hottest business lore in real time, follow me on Instagram at Sammy Cohen Talks and subscribe to my newsletter, Social Currency, which is linked in the show notes. Social Currency is a production of Social Currency Media and Money News Network. The podcast is hosted and executive produced by me, Sammy Cohen. Social Currency is produced by the Money News Network team. See you next time.